Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this new video in which we continue our close reading of Dialectic of Enlightenment by Theodor Adorno and Max Horkheimer. Today we're going to read the fifth section of the culture industry, and so far we've seen that the industry is perverting everything serious into a triviality. It turns everything into an abstraction and empties it of its substance. That's what we talked about in the fourth section. So basically, the industry is nihilism, and it turns everything into a joke. And like we said, we also talked about this distinction between genuine laughter and wrong laughter, and how it is an essential component of the industry, like wrong laughter. And so the fifth section is going to continue that thought, and it opens with a joke that was very like famous maybe in Nazi Germany, and that joke is the following. They write, "On one matter, however, this hollow ideology is utterly serious. Everyone is provided for. No one must be hungry or cold. Anyone failing to comply goes to a concentration camp." The joke from Hitler's Germany might well shine out as a maxim above all the portals of the culture industry. So that's the joke. The joke is no one must be hungry or cold. If you do not comply, you end up in a concentration camp in which you're gonna die from hunger and from cold. So again, this is another aspect of what we called the fear of castration. Like, you know, the culture industry castrates you. It makes you impotent. It makes you know it imposes on you this deal in which if you want to get the necessary things to to have a decent life, you must get rid of your own agency. So if you want to be provided for, you must do everything we tell you to do, but it is presented as if it is a choice. Like you have the choice of either eat and sleep in warmth, or you have the choice of starving in the cold. And so this kind of freedom has a name. It is called formal freedom, which is the kind of freedom that bourgeois society wants because it allows it to maintain its power. Now, in the 1947 edition of the book, bourgeois society was replaced by the latest society, because that's a way for the authors to suggest that formal freedom isn't specific to bourgeois society, which, because bourgeois society crumbled in the first half of the 20th century. So it wouldn't make sense to talk about formal freedom as just a freedom specific to bourgeois society. So anyways, what is this formal freedom? Well, it's the freedom to think whatever you want to think. Like, no one intervenes to hinder your freedom as long as you don't hurt others. In other words, you don't have to answer to anyone from an official institution, like for example the government. No one can impose on you what to think or what to do. We already mentioned this in a previous section. Now, everything that happens to you from now on becomes your own choice. If you starve and you are cold, then you chose to be starving and cold. It's like saying we gave you rules to follow, but you are free not to follow them if you want, but the result is that you will die. So this is formal freedom. It's like freedom, but only on paper. Real freedom, however, would be like, you don't have to follow my rules in order to avoid getting hungry or getting cold. Like, there would be no barrier for you to get the things that you need in order to survive. You don't have to comply with my rules in order to have a decent life. This would be more like real freedom. Like, if you refuse to eat the food that is available, if you refuse to reach for it and chew, then starvation would kind of be your own choice. But here it's more like we present you with a rigged game. Like, formal freedom is like that. It's a rigged game. Like, the rules don't really make sense, and they are obviously not working in your favor. It's like we present you with a game that you cannot win, but you have to play it because there is no other way to get food or shelter. And then, of course, when you lose, we will tell you that it is your fault because you didn't comply, because you didn't play by the rules, even though you did. So it's like when you play by the rules and then you end up starving and you complain, someone will tell you, well, no one forced you to play the game anyway. So this is how formal freedom works. Like, anyone is free to feed themselves, but if the only one who possesses the food makes you do, for example, demeaning things, If you complain, they will be like, hey, no one forced you to buy the food from me. And you'd be like, but there's no one else from whom I can get the food. And he'd be like, yeah, that ain't my problem. I don't have to change my rules just to accommodate you. And you'll say, but everyone is starving. And he says, again, not my problem. They can find other ways to get food if my services don't please them. So this is how formal freedom works. It's basically a monopoly. So society becomes monopolistic, meaning that you can only play by its rules in order to live with dignity. And of course, those rules, well, they won't let you have dignity, right? They will just give you some privileges over other people, maybe, in order to make sure that you don't try to break those rules. The scraps that you will get, the privileges, are a joke, of course, but you will be afraid to lose them because you'll be like, well, better this than nothing. And so you are forced to comply for those scraps. So even though no one is imposing on you what to think, well, you're not necessarily free. You cannot be free, for example, when you are ostracized from society because of your beliefs or because of your ideas. Like no one is forcing you to have those beliefs or ideas, but no one can force them to care about you either, right? So if you challenge, for example, the religion, if you challenge the color tastes of your boss, the opinions of your clubs, etc., if you are in the minority, regardless of the quality of your thought, like you can have very fucked up and unworkable thoughts, and we can argue that there are beliefs and ideas that can justify ostracizing someone. But here the issue is that this idea of, you know, no one has to no one intervenes, you know, to stop your thoughts or whatever. This is more an apparatus for social control. Like, this is the point. And this goes to even expertise. Like, even expertise is used for these aims, for, you know, social control. Like, professional expertise and knowledge are used to justify the status quo as if it's the only kind of knowledge that counts. Like, only the knowledge of expertise counts, even in the areas of life that don't have an expertise. Like, imagine if we invent an expertise in how to make friends and how to talk to people, or how to be more agreeable, more inviting. You know, that kind of would be crazy, right? Like, we would make it that behaviors we would make, you know, those behaviors in favor of an economic system, and that economic system would be positively enforced, right? Like through seminars of soft skills or motivational speaking events. And you would be told that you can use those skills to boost your careers. Like, you know, making friends would be like, you know, would be like a career. So it would be about skills, the same skills that you would use at your job. So it's another way of making, you know, the economic system more potent. You know, like, even like the economic system, the capitalist economic system, obviously is so potent that you even need its teachings in order to make friends. Like, even in your everyday life, you are forced to use the same apparatus, which only justifies even more that apparatus. They say the fact that in every career, and especially in the liberal professions, specialist knowledge as a rule goes hand in hand with a prescribed set of attitudes easily gives the misleading impression that expert knowledge is all that counts. In reality, it is a feature of the irrationally system nature of this society that it reproduces passively only the lives of its loyal members. So knowledge and expertise are more a test of loyalty to the social order than it is to actually make the lives of people better and to guarantee, you know, the things that we mentioned earlier, you know, food and shelter and access to healthcare, etc. So you know, that everyone gets provided for. You know, expertise is more about the loyalty to the social order than to really, you know, provide for everyone. So in short, society is kind of a cult with a hierarchy, and it wants everyone's adherence to it. It presents itself as if it is the only way. You know, its game is the only possible way for a game to have rules. It is, you know, blinded by its own rationality that it doesn't even see how irrational it is. Just like in a cult, you know, the people who are in a cult, they take you know, the rules and, you know, the order of the cult as rational, you know, and they don't see how fucked up and irrational it really is. So what is irrational for Adorno and Horkheimer is to persist into applying rationality to absolutely everything, you know. So when you apply rationality to every element in a set, the whole set actually becomes irrational. So this is the main thesis of Adorno and Horkheimer about the culture industry, is that, you know, you try to apply rationality to every fucking thing, and what you get at the end is just a whole set of irrationality. And so everyone becomes dogmatic in both, you know, the commands and the obedience to the culture industry. So both the manager, because he has the expertise on human relations, and the employee. In the text, Adorno refers to a comic character from the comic strip Blondie. It was popular at the time, and so the character is Dogwood, and he's an employee who is docile and always, you know, ready to listen to orders. You know, he never challenges his boss, and that's because he has the expertise on how to be submissive, you know. And so both the dominant and the submissive can both be reliable, because in domination and submission you have expertise, knowledge. So the machine can rest assured that no one will break the spell, because well, you know, it kind of becomes rational for you to be submissive to your boss. You know, you're not going to question whether or not, you know, you should be doing everything that he tells you. And so yeah, so everything, you know, you see all kinds of behaviors as rational. You know, even the most fucked up behavior becomes rational, because, well, it is produced by this system that claims that it is the most rational system that you can think of. So from the start, you are going to take every kind of behavior that happens within the culture industry as rational. So, like in the process of production and in work, there is a certain protocol to follow. Everything must go in a certain way with, you know, supervised steps. So anything that doesn't conform to the process leads to an unsellable result, or an unsolvable product. And so the same is applied to life, to everything, you know, in everyday life. A human life must go in a certain way with specific steps and with the supervision of the educational system, of work, of the state, of marriage, of the church, etc., etc. And so the way of life, or more precisely the American way of life, which today is the hegemony, but this is also true at the local level of any society that blindly, you know, claims to Enlightenment's values. And as we also explained, religion, myth, and culture are not the opposite of Enlightenment. So the way of life that is presented as the most accurate and reliable way to follow is what the industry basically does. It takes a certain way of life and it is going to reproduce it so much to make it so omnipotent that you cannot conceive of another way of living, like any other way of living that doesn't fit into the patterns of the culture industry is automatically going to be seen as irrational and therefore dangerous. So anyone who diverges from it will see their life get worse. So the failure of those who deviate isn't, of course, seen as a bug in the system, but it's very justification. When you see so many people, you know, fall through the cracks of the system, well, that is not an invitation to, you know, to bring into question that system, to think critically about the system. No, the fact that there are people who fall between the cracks, and the more there are, the stronger the system gets. You know, when you see that there are so many homeless people, when you see, you know, poverty growing, etc., it's not, you know, a call to criticize the system. No, it's justification. We say if people we just say, you know, if people just stick to it, they wouldn't be in the situation that they are in now. You know, that's what we say. We say that those who have failed, well, they are just, lazy. They are just, people who who made the choice to deviate from, the narrative that we gave them. So we will say stuff like that instead of, maybe it's a dick move to sabotage every reasonable attempt at living differently, right? Maybe the system is fucked up. Like, you're not going to say that. You are going to say that it's their own fault. Those who have failed, those who live on the streets, those who are frustrated, etc., those who are depressed, it is their own fault for being like that. So the culture industry has its ways of making the former the status quo, let's say, more persistent through the tragedy of the hero who had everything to succeed but somehow flunked it. Quote, anyone who goes hungry and suffers from cold, especially if he once had good prospect, is a marked man. He is an outsider, and with the occasional exception of the capital crime, to be an outsider is the gravest guilt. So such scenarios are giving to say that the original position in which the individual was born into was perfect. The system offered them everything that they can dream of. All they had to do was just to stick to the damn script. And hatred towards these individuals becomes justified because these individuals kind of like had it all. They only lost it all because of their own arrogance or their own hubris. And boy, do we get moral pleasure from hating on those who had it all and screw it because of their arrogance. Like we love that, As Adorno points, those who fail in this way are either at best eccentrics who receive all the mean jokes, or at worst the villain. At worst, they become the villain of the story. Adorno points also that in most films, it is often the latter case that we see, that they become the villain of the story. Like, they are a villain because, of course, that everything that society offered to him was the labor of the good people, right? And he just took advantage of that. The eccentric is a villain because he is ungrateful to others, The villain is basically that. It's someone who had it all, but because of his arrogance, he didn't accept to play by the rules of the system, and so he becomes this sort of ungrateful character who rejected society, rejected all the good things that the labor of others brought for him, and so he is just an ungrateful bastard. Like, everyone toiled and fought so that he can live in a society where he has food, order, and shelter, but because of his hubris, he threw it all away. So he kind of spat in the face of hard-working and good men and women, and therefore he deserves everything that he gets. And of course, the hard-working good men and women mentioned here are not the working class, but of course they are the leaders with whose cleverness and planning, none of it was possible. Quote, according to the according to the ideological illusion, the workers, the true providers, are fed by the leaders of industry, whom they fed. Thus, the position of the individual becomes precarious. Under liberalism, the poor were regarded as lazy. Today, they are automatically suspect. So if you are poor, it's because you weren't grateful for the leaders who fed you. That's the ideological narrative. Without the planning and the rationality of society as planned by the leaders, of course, you won't survive, since you are not smart yourself. You'd rather, spend the rest of your days in idleness and laziness, and the only way to make you work is with a threat. And so in pre-liberalism, the threat was the actual whip and stick. In today's society, the threat is your own choice. It's the possibility of going hungry if you do not comply with my rules. Since even a welfare state is supposedly established, there is no possible room for complaint anymore, right? So even when social security is established, it must be because of the philanthropic virtues of the leaders. And if social security is threatened, it's because the poor are not willing to work hard to pay for it. And so the rich have the right to take social security away from the ungrateful bastards. So when only the leaders provide, they have the right to take it away from you. And so what the Lord giveth, the Lord taketh away. And so only the culture industry can provide for you, so don't ever forget that. Like, this is the message. even simple acts of kindness must be administered by the industry. Even if someone, wants to provide from their own pockets to someone else, the industry imposes that the aid must contribute to its ideology. So in other words, the culture industry must make sure that acts of providing must be seen like they are coming from the private sphere, like they are immediate, if you want. If there is a mediation between you and Social Security, like the state, through taxes allows you to have access to Social Security, but given that it is run by the state, it can give the impression that it is a totalitarian regime, like you depend on the state. And so many libertarians would use this argument to reduce the power of the state, but not so that they can help others more efficiently, but so that they don't have to help anyone but themselves. Libertarianism is perhaps the best philosophy that fits the culture industry. Like the industry, aware of the totalitarian aspect of a state providing for people, needs to make it seem like the act is more direct. Like it is still it's still totalitarian, but how can I make it seem that there is no control, right? How can I make it seem that there is no totalitarian control? How can I bring all kinds of private impulses under a social contract? So what I do is I let the factories do the providing. Since factories are privately owned, by letting them decide and do the providing, I can be sure that even the private impulse is still serving my social control, while knowing that the factories won't provide for shit, by the way. It's a double win for the culture industry. It convinces people further that the ones who should provide are the ones who are literally exploiting them firsthand, right? Quote, the managed provision of friendly care administered by every factory as a means of increasing production brings the last private impulse under social control. By giving the appearance of immediacy, the relationships of people within production are returned to the private sphere. This is when philanthropists argue that it is the duty of the rich to help the poor through donations, which, spoiler alert, only makes the rich richer and doesn't help the poor at all. Philanthropy is a joke, don't fall for it. But this is exactly what the Nazis did. Adorno mentioned, the friendly aid of the Nazis, the winter aid, as it was called. It was an organization by the Nazis aimed at providing and helping the poor and unemployed, and this organization was created by the Ministry of Propaganda. So you kind of see the joke coming. The Nazis privatized everything, since they were all massively confident in their belief in, rationality and innate intelligence. They saw that the state as a means for was just a means for the stupid and the lazy to survive like parasites on the back of the strong, who are the healthy, the smart, the hard-working, wealthy people. So they turned everything into a private enterprise, believing that you can blindly trust anyone who has a factory. If they are the boss or the manager, it means that they must be smart, so we just let them organize everything. They will decide what to do with the poor and the unemployed to turn them into, hard-working, productive forces. And so the culture industry, with its films, radios, and even, academic credentials, directed all its efforts into painting these ruthless leaders as the helpers, as, the compassionate and the saviors of the nations, while at the same time punishing every act of compassion. And so with the industry, with the culture industry, compassion means only allowing the strong to kill the weak. That's what it means for the culture industry to be compassionate. It is you allow the strong to kill the weak, allowing the healthy to exterminate the sick. It's just a joke. So the sole lesson to take from the culture industry is that the poor and the destitute can only rely on the heart of gold of the rich. The only kind of compassion that can still be an act of kindness towards the powerless is the act that simply reinforces and reaffirms their powerlessness. The victims of a genocide must appeal to the humanitarian powers by their colonial policies caused the genocide. The point is to install some guilt within the ruling class to give, the impression that they take into consideration the plight of the ruled. And so this is the strategy of I will make things better after I fuck you over. Like you don't have to do anything. I will make things better for you, but once I just get to fuck you over. And so this means that like this may seem like justice, but in reality it just keeps the power between the hands of those who fucked you over, really. In other words, you are denied a say in the situation. You cannot, for example, say what should be done to fix the situation, because you'll probably dismantle the system that caused you to be the victim, but that system also is what caused the ruler to be a ruler. So the ruler wants that system to stay in place, so even when he fucks you up, he wants to be the one in charge of, fixing it. So to provide for the destitute must be done in a way that won't jeopardize the system and the ruling class. We will help, but our power stays. The damn hierarchy stays. So the best way to assure that is that the power remains in the hands of the ruling class. The poor are the helpless victims who cannot do shit on their own anyways, right? They're even too dumb to take themselves out of the situation without making things worse for everybody, right? And as such, the suffering of the people is acknowledged, like the culture industry finds again a way to make a synthesis between the ruthless social Darwinism that says that we don't have to care about the poor, and also the philanthropic love and care for the poor. But its solution is this: making the suffering as apparent as possible so that it becomes easier to manage. Like by intensifying it on the screen, for example, by making the victims more helpless. Victims are always more helpless in movies than they are in reality. So they make the victims more helpless to the point of even their genes somehow contributed to their helplessness. They become the perfect pretext for the powerful to be seen as a savior. And so the industry manages, therefore, a new synthesis. The word is so tragic, so hard, but in its tragedy, there is beauty. There are still, good people in there who are making a difference. Angels, like Jafar, for example, are here to rescue the poor. And if we can also make a spectacle out of it and a few bucks, well, why not? And so that is the catch. The actions like that of fundraisings and raising awareness don't aim at abolishing the suffering of the people, because society is not looking for that. To end the suffering of its members means that all of them have the power and capacity to live with dignity, to challenge that same society. And so instead, society is going to opt for another option. As long as there are people like Jafar, we don't have to change anything. Okay, so Jafar is basically a celebrity in Tunisia, and he has this show in which he brings in people who are poor, who are victims of some tragic events or of poverty or whatever, and then he calls for donations, to help those people. And yeah, I mean this is what kind of the kind of fascist society would do. It wants to make it seem as if the poor and the destitute, the victims, can only rely on those at the top, on the generosity of those at the top, in order to have some dignity, some decent life. Quote, just as totalitarian society does not abolish the suffering of its members, but registers and plans it, mass culture does the same with tragedy, hence the persistent borrowings from art. And so the role of art here is its ability to turn tragedies into blessings. But art does it more through sublimation, whereas the culture industry just borrows from art. It needs tragedies to turn into entertainment, but doesn't want to be meaningless entertainment. It needs the effect that art does on tragedy. Or rather, entertainment cannot really make something trivial into a tragedy, and so the culture industry wants to manufacture tragedies. In other words, in a world where with technology and the growing comfort, tragedies become less meaningful because they start to seem avoidable. right? Like, the power of art regarding the tragic is that it makes an event so overwhelming that it feels like nothing could have been done otherwise. Like when you watch a movie and it's about a tragedy, but there is a plot hole or the character acted in a dumb way that could have been easily avoided, you don't get the impact of the tragedy, right? And so in art, however, that is what captures the essence of tragedy. Through suffering, human beings in art are broken so that they can reach into their depths, into the abyss. And so tragedy was the inevitability of reaching higher truths and existence. So we break surfaces and it's a painful process, but through it we discover that there is so much more beneath those surfaces. The culture industry, however, since it wants us to stay on surfaces, it needs a subterfuge to make it seem like we haven't lost touch with that depth. It then shows us a depth that will serve its narrative. It creates an artificial struggle, something to be conquered, a useless competition or useless, hardship. It plans and gives people the illusion that fate is still a thing. So it keeps showing the suffering of the people, and along with it, those who raise at the top, who are strong, healthy, beautiful, who climb to the mountains and, stand on the hills contemplating the landscape with a triumphant gaze. Quote, "The unbroken surface of existence, in the duplication of which ideology consists solely today, appears all the more splendid, glorious, and imposing the more it is imbued with necessary suffering. It takes on the aspect of fate." So tragedy therefore becomes paradoxical. On the one hand, it is prescribed as the curse that inflicts those who don't conform, so it is used for conformist purposes, but at the same time it is also seen as the trademark of the hero who resists conformism. It's the trademark of the rebel. So in other words, the culture industry punishes and glorifies rebels and conformists, and it paints them against each other as to suggest that the antagonism is still a thing, that we are not in a monopoly, that there is still, something to accomplish or something to overcome. So capitalism versus communism, fascism versus anti-fascism, atheist versus theists, high art versus low art, rich versus poor, all become the same thing, It's just, there is the culture industry that is generating these oppositions to make us feel like there is, antagonism, like there is, some sort of struggle, like there is not just one monopoly, to make the illusion that there are still things that would make us different from one another. But in reality, all of these ideologies become the creation of the same system, of the same culture industry. Kind of like in nature, in nature, the hot and the cold are not really antagonists, but they are the product of the same mathematical formula. Everything in society becomes like that too. And so all antagonisms are brushed off. Everything becomes managed by the standards of, for example, women's serials, which are light novels that are published in serial forms in magazines and were destined to housewives. Their main formula is getting into trouble and out again. So tragedy becomes but a pretext to keep the machine going. Whether it is at the top of society, where a hysteric villain with eccentric scientific knowledge tricks her rival into abandoning her cozy and traditional happiness by exposing her to sensuality and hardcore facts about the world, you can think of many stories like that. There is a world of traditional values, and the heroine, often a woman, is met with either a genius but rebel man, or a woman who is rational and rejects all values and morality and seduces her way into society. Or when it is the man, he seduces her into doing the same, and then this villain meets his death in an untheatrical way. Adorno probably thinks about the novels of Le Marquis de Sade, which he analyzes in the second excursus, so we will have a look at that in due time. Or at the bottom, you have stories like, the Hungarian operettas. Adorno means by this the tragedy only happened due to a misunderstanding that evolved, it went to, from a misunderstanding we got into a tragedy, but at the end it is usually solved, and those were the operettas. Like whether we are at the top or the bottom, the same formula is applied. You get into trouble and out again just to get into trouble again, etc., etc., etc. And so the point is that at the end, when you leave conformism, you will pay with death, because that's what happens to the villain, right? The villain is basically someone who left conformism, and he had to pay that with his life. And so you cannot leave the system. Even if you want to be a rebel, you are allowed to be a rebel as long as you comply with the system. So in other words, being a rebel kind of becomes some sort of conformism. And so what the industry does is that it creates the villains. We will make the misunderstanding so that you don't get bored, but at the end, the giveaway is to see that our way is the only way. That's the point of the industry. So, quote, even the worst outcome, which once had the better intention, still confirms the established order and corrupts tragedy. Whether because the irregular lover pays for her brief happiness with death, or because the sad end in the picture makes the indestructibility of actual life shine all the more brightly. Tragic cinema is becoming truly a house of moral correction. And there you have it. The point of the mass culture is moral correction. It is a manufacturing of the heart of gold. Everyone must have a heart of gold, otherwise everyone dies. And so here have your moment of rebellion on the screen, but don't have it in real life. The system therefore not only provides food and shelter if you comply, but even rebellious and rage against its own crushing nature. And so as long as the system crushes you, you can have your revolt. Like let the system crush you, and then we will give you, these movies in which you can identify with the rebel, and so you would feel like like things are fair. Again, this is the same idea. I fuck you up, but I will be the one in charge of how to fix this. So I take all agency from you, but as a means to fix it, I will let you experience rebellion through the screen. And so once your revolt actually disturbs the system, it is seen as immoral. And so disobedience must always be civil in the ways the system defies civility, which, as we've seen last time with what the culture industry does to language, only means that it is the interests of the system. And so in short, it must decide on everything. The system, the culture industry, decides on everything. And if you do not comply with it, then you are immoral. Quote, culture has always contributed to the subduing of revolutionary as well as of barbaric instincts. Culture, the industrial culture does something more. It inculcates the conditions on which implacable life is allowed to be lived at all. So the culture industry forces individuals to lose themselves in the collective, whereas the collective, should be what guarantees the individuality of each. In the culture industry, it becomes a tool for oppression. The collective, created by the industry, imposes its artificial rules on individuals, and individuals cannot say anything back, otherwise they'll be expelled from the collective from which they depend. So the collective produces the suffering of individuals, and then the collective tells them that it is the only cure. Without it, things would only get worse. And so the powerlessness of people only increases. In order for their life to go on, they need to abandon their life to the culture industry and to the collective. And in exchange, the industry gives the promise that they will continue to exist. But of course, the bodies that exist only as a lump of meat, a goo of matter to be used as a fuel for the big machine. So no one exists as an individual, but they hope that they are individuals if they give themselves up to the industry. At least the industry lets them live in their own misery. Quote, One needs only to become aware of one's nullity to subscribe to one's own defeat, and one is already a party to it. Society is made up of the desperate and thus falls prey to rackets. So, rackets, if you remember, was the theory that Horkheimer took from Pollock about the phase of capitalism in which Adorno and Horkheimer lived. Racket theory, to refresh your memory, means that human relations, even within members of the same class, become based on pure competition. It's basically when everyone lives with the might makes right kind of mentality, whether it is the rulers between them, or between rulers and ruled, or between the ruled themselves. Everyone is prey to a racket once they realize how insignificant they really are. So even the feeling of hopelessness affects the rulers as well, just like we said with the example of Odysseus, who chains himself to the mast of his ship. Even the bourgeoisie has developed this pessimism that they too are prisoners of their own system. So even they fall into despair and to rackets. But of course, the rackets for the bourgeoisie are just other bourgeois individuals. So the bourgeois businessman who is, for example, disappointed by his son's attitude and laziness, and he was looking at his son as if he is a housewife bored to death in her plushy lined room, reading serials and watching soap operas. Like, even the businessman himself has realized that his prestigious place is but that of an employee in the culture industry. The hopes of liberalism, of seeing their hopes in the autonomous liberal individual who makes their own private initiative, like we desperately try to reinvent that with the startup nation, all of those hopes were completely destroyed. Even the ruling class doesn't believe in this shit anymore. Everyone is just a pawn in someone else's game now. Quote, the possibility of becoming an economic subject, an entrepreneur, a proprietor, is entirely liquidated. Right down to the small grocery, the independent firm on the running and inheriting of which the bourgeois family and the position of its head were founded has fallen into hopeless dependence. All have become employees, and in the civilization of employees, the dignity of the father, dubious in any case, ceases to be. So even the father, the figure of authority, is undermined, since he too is now an employee. Not as an actual employee, but even as a father. Like, his job as a father is like the regular job of an employee. In short, even the patriarch is not even the master of his own patriarchal home. So everyone becomes a masochist at this point, as in they give in their power to someone else to stomp on them, even those at the top. The best way for them, by the way, to avoid any accountability is by bringing up that they too are victims. Like, you hear this all the time when people in power, they are accused of something, they try to avoid accountability and responsibility by bringing up the fact that somehow they too are victim of a system that is beyond them. And so everyone becomes kind of like a lover wooing desperately their love interest. We all become simps, basically, and we enjoy it. We enjoy simping and getting rejected. We love trying to prove ourselves to someone that will ultimately reject us. Adorno, by the way, compares this with rites of initiations in some tribes, where a boy, for example, must demonstrate their moral character by receiving blows from a priest, and the boy must keep, showing on a smile through the whole ceremony. But the difference, however, is that with the actual rite, the rite actually, the ceremony actually has an end, but in the culture industry, the initiation rites never end. As they say, existence in late capitalism is a permanent rite of initiation. Everyone must show that they identify wholeheartedly with the power which beats them. So everything we do in our culture is a testimony that we are not good enough, that we must be broken down over and over again, no matter how much we put on a smile. So failure is therefore the norm. If someone succeeds and passes the initiation, then the whole shenanigan would be over. And so instead, the culture industry makes the rite of initiation the goal itself. So failing to complete the initiation is the point. Adorno goes through several cultural examples to demonstrate this, and again he goes back to jazz, his worst enemy. For him, in jazz, the base for rhythm is syncopation, and it's when you displace the beat you displace the beats in a rhythm. It's like you keep breaking the rhythm so that there is no completion. In jazz, according to Adorno at least, there is no beginning. There's no beginning nor end. So it is a perpetual breaking of the melody. Like the melody is in constant initiation, right? And it's never allowed to be itself. He also mentions radio crooners, who he says sound like eunuchs. Crooners are singers that used to sing for the radio, and it kind of sounded like this.
Learn to croon if you want to win your heart's desire. Sweet melodies of love inspire romance. Just murmur da-da-dee, da-da-da-dee, and when you do, she'll answer da-da-dee, da-da-dee, and nestle closer to you. Learn to croon, you'll eliminate each rival soon. If you're heading for a sunny honeymoon, learn to croon.
Yeah, that was Bill Crosby, but you can also consider Frank Sinatra as a crooner. Why is this a eunuch's voice? I don't know, but Adorno finds in it too an aspect of castration, of never allowing someone to be complete, always having to depend on the collective or on the system, etc. He also talked about the stereotype of the handsome suitor, of the heiress who falls into the pool with his tuxedo. You know scenes like that when you see someone who tries to impress a girl, or he acts cool in fancy clothes at a party, but then he falls into a pool. The culture industry wants to be like that, to be what the industry can break. That's how you prove your loyalty to the system. Show your willingness to be what the system wants to break, and you will get some of the system's power in return. A power that is a joke, of course, but some power nonetheless. Quote, everyone can be like the omnipotent society. Everyone can be happy if only they hand themselves over to it body and soul and relinquish their claim to happiness. In their weakness, society recognizes its own strength and passes some of it back to them. Their lack of resistance certifies them as reliable customers. Hence the ultimate win of society over the individual. It manages to make tragedy obsolete, a part of it, like tragedy used to stem from the antithesis between individual and society. Like the brokenness that we feel in tragedy comes from the fact that society precisely cannot dominate the individual, nor it can accommodate him in all of the individual's complexity. Tragedy was a way for the individual to affirm himself against society. So what does this mean? Well, we can take a look at the next quote, which I think is very interesting. Adorno and Horkheimer write, tragedy glorified courage and freedom of feeling in face of a mighty foe, sublime adversity, a problem which awakened dread. Now that's a quote from Nietzsche. More specifically, it comes from the Twilight of the Idols, aphorism 24 in the section Expeditions of an Untimely Man. Now the translation that I have here, it's from Hollingdale, so the text is a little bit different. I think the one that the book used is actually translation by Jephcott himself, the guy who translated Dialectic of Enlightenment. But anyway, so what is the point of that aphorism? Well, it's about the notion of art for art's sake, l'art pour l'art. It is often taken to mean as that art serves no purpose other than itself. We make art just for the sake of art. And as Nietzsche explains, this idea came in order to free art from morality. Like before the 19th century, the dominant view of art is that art must teach morality, since art is very powerful in arousing the passions. Institutions wanted to use art to arouse the right kind of passions, and so art was used to make you a better Christian, for example. By painting scenes from the Bible, it was believed that people will be motivated to embrace Christian ethics. And so nationalism does the same with the love of the nation. We use art so that it arouses a love towards the nation, and that is claimed to be a moral value, a virtue. But as you can guess, this means that art also has to be restricted to, well, propaganda. Whatever doesn't put forth morality, and of course, the morality decided upon by the ruling class, is casted as deviant, as immoral, as obscene, and must be censored. And so the idea behind art for art's sake is to liberate art from the constraints of morality. It means that art doesn't have any moral purposes, that it's not here to teach you morality or how to be a virtuous person. But then, for what? What is the point of art? What is its purpose? Well, this is where Nietzsche comes in. He embraces the idea that the purpose of art shouldn't be morality, but he rejected the idea that art should have no purpose. Art's purpose for Nietzsche isn't art itself, but to free the potential of people in order to become what he calls the Übermensch, the Superman. Nietzsche believed that morality was the tool of the weak to prevent the strong from reaching their full potential. So the strong want to welcome life in all of its aspects, the good as well as the bad. The Supermen are themselves because they become themselves by letting nothing stand in their way of welcoming life. The weak, however, according to Nietzsche, denies life. The weak cannot stand the brutality of life, and so they invent rules to make sure that nothing hurts them. By being afraid of the vitality of the strong, they use morality as a set of rules to weaken the strong, to make the strong inoffensive. And so Nietzsche argues that morality in art is the slave's tool for denying life in its most sublime forms. The purpose of art for Nietzsche is the affirmation of life and to desire life. He wants an art that reflects the full vitality of life. Like life for Nietzsche is a vital force that permeates everything. It is exalting and seeks to affirm itself, to overcome all obstacles in its way. And so life always finds a way, as we say. It's when you see a plant growing out of a concrete crack, it's about pure resilience. So hence art is never about accepting the status quo. Some have theorized it like that. Nietzsche mentions his late spiritual father, Schopenhauer, as someone who viewed art as a way to escape from life's will, but that's a pessimistic view for Nietzsche that teaches nothing but resignation and not resilience. And so tragedy for Nietzsche is the highest form of art, and for Schopenhauer, tragedy was some sort of a lesser evil. Like Schopenhauer felt like a pawn in life's game. The will, as he calls it, forces human beings into seeking constant desires so that, life, the will, reproduces itself. So tragedy for Schopenhauer is the sublime communication of resistance, futility in front of, the will. And so at least tragedy can sublimate that feeling of helplessness in front of life's plans. But for Nietzsche, tragedy, on the contrary, is about everything but resignation. The artist, through a tragedy, communicates the overcoming of oneself. The tragic fate of heroes for Nietzsche is about the kind of resilience that makes social rules meek by comparison. So the hero is out there fighting against fate, and even though he knows that he won't beat fate, he accepts the cruelty of life and would do it again and again, not out of resignation, but out of courage and freedom. And so his freedom lies in the fact that he is like a soldier who, knowing that he cannot escape the war, goes with a self-asserted smile on the battlefield. And this is not at all like the culture industry, since, as we said, the level at which the hero affirms himself cannot be tamed by the chains of society. Like, sure, the war was organized by kings and all, and that soldier that soldiers, fight with a smile is what kings want. But the smile of the hero isn't like the smile of the boy who keeps getting slapped in the face by the priest. The smile of the soldier, who's like the boy, is a smile that confirms the power of the king over him, whereas the smile of the hero is one that doesn't even care about the power of the king. The king cannot even predict what the hero will do on the battlefield, and as he sees the hero slay all the other of the king's enemies, he'd be more afraid of him than glad that he is winning the war. Like this is what tragedy is about for Nietzsche. Like your king, okay, he sees you fighting with a smile on your face, but contrary to the other, let's say, common soldiers who also put on a smile because of propaganda, you on the other hand, you put on a smile because you are welcoming the thrill of life. You're not fighting for the glory of the king, you are fighting because you are seeking the thrill of life. And this, according to Nietzsche, would scare the shit out of your king. The king wants you to put a smile to affirm his power, but you don't care about his power at all. And so tragedy for Nietzsche depicts a man as opposed not even to a social order, but to life itself. Man is in a constant struggle against all odds, especially against himself, trying to conquer himself. And this, for Adorno, represents the revolutionary potential for human beings. And so, in other words, the tragedy of mankind is greater than society and can easily break its chains, even if at the end the hero, despite its feast, loses the battle. But the idea is that for the Superman, the war that the kings were fighting was just a battle for him. The war of kings is just a battle, a small, insignificant battle for the Superman. So by losing that one battle, the hero won a bigger war than any king would. And so that's what tragedy is about. It shows the antagonisms of life. It maintains man's identity in opposition to the collective, to nature, to fate. And so as long as man fights, even when he is killed by them, he has conquered them. Even if he is killed by the collective, nature, or fate, he still has conquered them. But the culture industry, as we said, brushes all antagonisms away. It seeks to integrate what cannot be integrated within itself, and so tragedy becomes a tool to integrate the individual into the collective by denying the identity of both. And so the subject and society become the same. Quote, "The miracle of integration, the permanent benevolence of those in command who admit the unresisting subject while he chokes down his unruliness, all this signifies fascism." So, art for art's sake is basically the motto of the industry. There is no greater purpose than the industry itself. Whereas in tragedy, the overcoming of hardships is to assert the identity of the individual free from the collective. In the culture industry, overcoming hardships further strengthens the grip of the collective over the individual. And so, work doesn't allow for the worker to become himself, for example. He is alienated, to use the Marxist jargon, because the purpose of his work isn't to experience tragedy like in art, but to make a profit for his boss. He is like the sailors in Odysseus' ship. They row, but only mechanically, without any consciousness of what's happening around them, for the sole reason to bring their king to his goal. And so all activities within the culture industry are deprived of their substance. We are like rocks that don't feel anything, who are indifferent to everything. We are like the soldier who comes home with a stoic face. And so Adorno ends this section with a mention of a soldier in the culture industry. He says, "One is reminded of the sad pliability of the soldier returning home unaffected by the war, of the casual laborer who finally joins the clandestine groups and the paramilitary military organizations. The liquidation of tragedy confirms the abolition of the individual." So that's it for this fifth section. It ends on that note. The liquidation of tragedy, of when the culture industry integrates tragedy within itself, it confirms the abolition of the individual. Now we are going to go back to the philosophy of Nietzsche many times in further videos, because Adorno and Horkheimer are actually highly critical of Nietzsche. I mean, here they kind of used it for they kind of used it in a positive way, let's say, but in many other passages of the book, especially in the second excursus, which we will go through in many weeks, they are actually very critical of Nietzsche. So just wanted to point that out. And so that's it for this fifth section. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that you find it helpful. And as always, thank you for watching, and I will see you next time for the sixth section.